France didn't start with a report. It started with a headscarf, banned from classrooms in 2004. Then the full veil, banned from the street in 2010. Then an entire anti-separatism law in 2021 that shut down mosques, dissolved associations, and cut off the foreign imams who once filled French pulpits. Each time, critics warned the state was going too far. Each time, France went further. And in 2025, it crossed the line that changes everything, no longer regulating what Muslims wear, but naming who they are, and drafting a new law to punish an idea it calls Islamist entryism. To understand why that matters, and why it frightens millions of French citizens who have done nothing wrong, you have to understand that France is not like other Western countries, and you have to follow the line step by step as it moved. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what France did, why it did it, what the evidence actually shows, and why the most explosive claims about it fall apart the moment you read the government's own words. Because this is a story where both sides are partly right, and that is precisely what makes it so dangerous. Start with the idea underneath everything, Laïcité. In 1905, France passed a law separating church and state so completely that the Republic, in its own words, neither recognizes, nor funds, nor subsidizes any religion. Laïcité is not written into the American idea of freedom of religion, where the state simply stays out of the way. It is something stronger and stranger. A belief that the public square must be kept religiously neutral, that faith belongs in private, and that the Republic comes before any god. Officially, Laïcité protects all beliefs equally. It is neutrality, not hostility. That is the theory. The argument of the last 20 years has been about what happens when that theory meets a growing Muslim population in practice. Nobody knows exactly how large that population is, because France, faithful to its own principles, refuses to record religion in its census. Every number you have ever heard is an estimate. The most cited, from the Pew Research Center, put it at around 5.7 million people, roughly 8.8% of the country, back in 2016. Other surveys land in a similar range. What is not in dispute is that it is the largest Muslim population in Western Europe, mostly rooted in France's former colonies in North Africa, and that its visibility has become the central fault line of French politics. The first crack opened not in 2004, but in 1989, when 3 schoolgirls were sent home from a middle school for refusing to remove their headscarves. The affair of the veil, the French called it. For 15 years it simmered. Then, in March 2004, France passed a law banning conspicuous religious symbols, the Islamic veil, the Jewish kippah, large Christian crosses, from public primary and secondary schools. On paper, it named no single religion. In reality, everyone understood what it was about. Supporters said it protected children from pressure and kept the classroom a neutral space. Critics said it pushed devout Muslim girls out of public education. The law stood. 6 years later, France went further. In 2010, it banned concealing the face in any public space, the measure the world called the burqa ban. Again, the text was religiously neutral. Again, everyone knew. Wear a full-face veil on a French street, and you could be fined and sent to a citizenship class. This one did not stay purely French. A woman challenged it all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. And in 2014, that court did something significant. It upheld the ban, not on grounds of security, which it rejected, but on the vague and almost philosophical idea of living together, that a society may require its members to show their faces to one another. Two dissenting judges called that reasoning far-fetched, and 4 years later, the United Nations Human Rights Committee flatly disagreed, ruling that the ban violated the freedom of religion of the women it targeted. Two of the highest human rights bodies on earth, looking at the same French law, reached opposite conclusions. Remember that. It is the pattern for everything that follows. Then came the years that hardened France's heart. Between 2015 and 2020, France was struck again and again by Islamist terror. The massacre at the offices of Charlie Hebdo in January 2015, the coordinated attacks across Paris that November, more than 130 dead, 90 of them at the Bataclan concert hall. The truck, driven into a Bastille Day crowd in Nice in 2016, 86 killed. And then, in October 2020, the attack that changed the temperature of the entire debate. A schoolteacher named Samuel Paty, beheaded outside his school for showing caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad in a class on free expression. A teacher, the very symbol of the secular republic, murdered for teaching it. Days before Paty's killing, President Macron had given a speech in the suburb of Les Mureaux, warning of what he called Islamist separatism, the growth, as he saw it, of a parallel society inside France, living by its own rules, turning its back on the Republic. Paty's murder turned that speech into legislation. In August 2021, France passed the law that critics still call the separatism law, and the government calls the law reinforcing respect for the principles of the Republic. It was sweeping. It forced neutrality on private companies carrying out public services. It required any association wanting public money to sign a contract of Republican commitment. It turned homeschooling from a right into something you had to request permission for. It tightened control over the foreign funding of mosques, and it broadened the state's power to dissolve organizations it deemed dangerous. And the state used that power. According to the government's own tally, its wider crackdown on radical Islamism ran tens of thousands of inspections and closed hundreds of establishments, restaurants, schools, businesses, prayer halls suspected of spreading extremism. Around 20 mosques were shut. Roughly 30 associations were dissolved. 2 of them became symbols of the whole fight. In 2020, the state dissolved Baraka City, a Muslim humanitarian charity, and the Collective Against Islamophobia in France, known as the CCIF, an organization whose entire purpose was to document discrimination against Muslims. France's highest administrative court, the Conseil d'État, upheld the CCIF's dissolution, finding that some of its rhetoric amounted to incitement to hatred. The CCIF's defenders saw something darker, a state shutting down the very group that catalogued the state's treatment of Muslims. France even reached into the mosques themselves. For decades, hundreds of imams had been sent to France and paid by foreign governments: Turkey, Algeria, Morocco. From the first day of 2024, France stopped accepting these seconded imams, insisting that those who preach in France be trained in France in French, in the values of the Republic. To supporters, it was common sense. Why should Ankara or Algiers choose who preaches in Marseille? To critics, it was the state extending its grip over how French Muslims are allowed to worship. Even France's own guardrails strained. When the government reviewed the 2021 law, the Constitutional Council struck down parts of it, including a power letting the Interior Minister suspend an association on the mere claim of urgency, and a clause allowing the state to deny residence to foreigners who reject the principles of the Republic, which the judges found too vague to be lawful. The machine was moving fast enough that France's own highest court had to pull it back. And still, it kept moving. In 2023, a new education minister, Gabriel Attal, banned the abaya, the loose, full-length robe, from public schools, arguing it was a religious symbol in disguise. Muslim groups challenged it. The Conseil d'État upheld it within days. Then the fight moved onto the football pitch. France's Football Federation already banned the headscarf during matches, and in 2023, the Conseil d'État upheld that too. In early 2025, the French Senate went further and passed a bill to ban conspicuous religious symbols, the hijab included, from all sports competitions. But here is the first place the official story breaks from the popular one. That sports bill is not law. It passed the Senate and then stalled in the National Assembly, where it has sat without a final vote. France did not, in fact, ban the hijab from all sport. And when United Nations experts looked at France's existing sports bans, they did not praise them. They called them discriminatory and said they must be reversed. The country that sees itself as the birthplace of human rights was being told by the guardians of human rights that it had gone too far. Which brings us to the line itself, the one crossed in 2025. On the 21st of May, 2025, President Macron gathered his ministers into a defense council, the kind of meeting usually reserved for war and national security. On the table was a report the government had spent a year preparing, written by a senior prefect and a veteran diplomat. Its title, The Muslim Brotherhood and Political Islamism in France. And it did something no French government report had ever done quite so plainly. It named a specific, legal, established French Muslim Federation, Muslims of France, formerly the Union of Islamic Organizations of France, as the national branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. The report's core idea was not a bomb plot. It was something it called entryism from below. Not terrorism, not a coup, a slow, patient, legal strategy, it claimed, of building local ecosystems. A mosque, a school, a charity, a sports club, a network of associations that gradually frame the life of a Muslim from birth to death, and over time pull communities away from the secular republic and toward a rival set of values. The report put numbers to it. Around 139 places of worship it considered affiliated, spread across 55 of France's departments. At least 280 associations, 21 schools, teaching some 4,000 children. It concluded that this quiet spread was a threat to national cohesion. For millions of ordinary French Muslims, this landed like an accusation aimed at their whole way of life. And the Interior Minister, Bruno Retailleau, sharpened it further, declaring that the ultimate goal of this movement was to tip all of French society into Sharia. But now read the report itself, because this is where the truth complicates the headline, and where honesty demands we slow down. The report does not say what the Interior Minister said. In its own conclusions, it states plainly that no recent evidence shows that Muslims of France seeks to establish an Islamic State in France or to impose Sharia law. It says the threat does not resort to violent action. It does not classify the Federation as a terrorist organization. And in a passage its critics seized on, it even warns against an essentialized view of Islam. against the media reflex of treating every Muslim as a potential Islamist, and calls instead for a third secular path. So the flagship document that supposedly proved France was under siege by a Sharia conspiracy explicitly found no plan for an Islamic state, no Sharia project, and no violence. What it alleged was subtler and, in its own words, harder to prove, a long-term project of influence. The government's own report was more careful than the government's own minister. That gap did not go unnoticed. The federation named in the report, Muslims of France, rejected the accusation outright, calling it an unfounded amalgamation that dangerously blurs the line between Islam, political Islamism, and radicalism. France's Council of the Muslim Faith warned that the report's refusal to clearly define its own terms, Muslim Brotherhood, political Islam, entryism, left ordinary Muslims feeling they now lived under permanent suspicion. And a political scientist named Frank Fregosi, an expert on Islam in France, who was himself cited in the report, said bluntly that its central thesis of a secret plot was never credibly demonstrated. He pointed out that the movement's supposed hardcore numbered only a few hundred people, a fraction of 1% of France's Muslims, and asked how so tiny a group could possibly be subverting an entire republic. President Macron, for his part, tried to hold the middle. He warned against what he called a double trap, being naive about the threat, but also lumping all Muslims together with extremists. He did not order sweeping measures on the spot. He asked for proposals and reconvened the Defense Council that summer. And out of those meetings came the machinery of the next phase, a mechanism to freeze the assets of associations suspected of entryism, an extension of the state's dissolution powers to reach the funds that finance these networks, and a public awareness campaign aimed at local officials before the municipal elections of March 2026. Then, in 2026, the Senate went the final step and adopted a bill written specifically to fight Islamist entryism, creating a new offense of undermining the fundamental principles of the Republic and new powers to dissolve and to freeze. As of now, that bill too has passed the Senate but is not yet law. The line is being drawn even as we speak. So, who is right? There is a France that looks at Samuel Paty's empty classroom, at the Bataclan, and a teacher in Arras stabbed to death by a former pupil in 2023, and says, enough. It argues that a republic built on secular values has every right to defend them, that foreign-funded religious networks and separatist enclaves are a real danger to social cohesion, and that naming the problem is not bigotry, but courage. To this France, the years of laws are not an attack on Muslims, but a defense of the one framework, Laïcité, under which people of every faith and none can live together as equals. And there is another France that looks at the same events and sees a state that has slid from protecting its principles to policing a minority. It points out that the flagship report found no plot, no state, no Sharia, and yet was announced from a war council chaired by the president. It points to the real cost on the other side of the ledger, France's own defender of rights, reporting that a third of people seen as Muslim say they have faced religious discrimination, a sharp rise in anti-Muslim acts in 2025, and, that same year, the murder of a young man named Abubakar Cissé, stabbed to death while praying alone in a mosque in southern France. To this France, every new law and every new report tells millions of loyal citizens that they are suspects in their own country and risks creating the very alienation it claims to fear.
Both of these Frances are real.
Both can point to facts, and the deepest danger in this story is that each one, pushed hard enough, can make the other come true. A state that stigmatizes its Muslims can breed the separatism it dreads. A community that turns inward can feed the fears that are used against it. What makes France's 2025 line so significant is not that it banned a garment or closed a mosque. France had been doing that for 20 years. It is that the state moved from regulating behavior to naming an enemy, from what people wear to who they are said to be, and began writing laws against an idea. That is a profound thing for a liberal democracy to do. Fight terrorism, and almost everyone agrees. Fight entryism, an influence you concede is legal and non-violent, and you are now asking the Republic to police thoughts and associations and loyalties. The question France cannot escape is whether a country founded on liberty can defeat an idea without betraying itself.
And all of Europe is watching the answer. Because France is not alone in its anxieties. From Vienna to Stockholm, governments are wrestling with the same questions about Islam, integration, and identity. And France, as it so often does, has gone first and gone furthest. If it succeeds, it may hand the continent a template for confronting political Islam within the bounds of the law. If it fails, if it stigmatizes millions to fight a few hundred, or is struck down by its own courts and the human rights bodies it helped create, it will be a warning, written in the country that has always believed it could reason its way to the right answer. The line has been crossed.
The report has been written, the War Council has met, the new law is moving through Parliament. What no one yet knows is whether France has just defended the Republic or quietly redefined who is allowed to belong to it. And whichever it turns out to be, the rest of Europe will not be far behind.